Welcome to the Seniors Flourish podcast, where it's all about helping occupational therapy practitioners working with older adults be the best they can be. And now your host, Mandy Chamberlain.
This episode of the Seniors Flourish podcast is brought to you by the Seniors Flourish Learning Lab. I completely get it. I was once too an OT practitioner struggling at my first real job. I had no mentorship. I had limited clinical resources. I didn't really have that much for patient handouts. And I didn't have anyone to ask clinical questions to. I was struggling. If this is how you feel, check out what the Learning Lab membership can do for you at seniorsflourish.com/learning lab. I challenge you to disrupt the norm, be an occupation-based practitioner, use the evidence to support your outcomes, and just be the best clinician you can be. So check it out and join the Learning Lab today at seniorsflourish.com/learning lab. Welcome everyone to the Seniors Flourish podcast. My name is Mandy Chamberlain. I'm occupational therapy and the host of your show. And today we are going to be talking about mastering fieldwork. And I have my lovely guest today. It's Miri Lee. She's an occupational therapist. She has her doctorate in occupational therapy. And you actually might even be familiar with her through her OT YouTube channel, her website. All of it's called OT Miri. So Miri, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today.
Hello. It's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is a great topic. So we're going to be talking about, like I said, mastering fieldwork, but just talking about 7 tips that, quote, I wish I had known by Miri. It's going to be great because it'll be such a helpful, get people in the mindset of, that people are nervous about field work and we're trying to, it's just an intimidating, I think, time. You've learned all those skills in school and then trying to apply them and be professional and making sure that you're getting everything covered. So I'm excited about the 7 tips. But before we kind of get started, I always love chatting with my guests about kind of what their OT journey is. And why don't you talk about what you're doing today? Because you have a lot going on too.
Right. So some of you know me as OT Miri. I have a YouTube channel, OT Miri, and I talk about different topics, mainly related to NBCOT in preparation for the NBCOT exam. And that's really how I started. After I didn't pass my board the first time, I turned on my computer, looked into that monitor hole, and I was like, look, I didn't pass. I might not be the only one. No one really likes to advertise on social media that they did not pass, but I can't be the only one. Somebody out there has to understand what this feels like. And I just wanted to talk about it. I never thought it would become a channel. I never thought I would be doing this for, how long has it been? 10 months now. But what started as just a desire to reach out and connect with others who might have the same experience and offer my suggestions and tips on what I did to then pass the second time, turn into really a thriving online platform of students and recent graduates and, candidates who are preparing for the exam, supporting one another, asking questions, and coming together based on their shared passion and occupation, occupational therapy. So it's just really been wonderful. And it's taken me to places that I didn't imagine or expect. Every chapter has been a surprise, a pleasant surprise. And I've been enjoying it. I recently launched a website. It's otmiri.com that attempts to consolidate all of the different platforms and resources that have been created over the last 10 months, still transferring everything over, but it's that website has also been a wonderful avenue by which members come together through a forum to exchange ideas and connect with one another and network and gain helpful insights. So that has been keeping me quite busy and excited. It's been a very meaningful journey.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Those are the platforms of, social media in general, I think is such a there's the positives and negatives of social media, but it's such a neat way, I think, for, you know, occupational therapy as a profession to be able to connect with others that have, you know, been through the same experience, like you were talking about not passing, or, you know, people are nervous about going into the field, or, you know, it's all those unknowns and trying to, you know, it's that new chapter of professionalism. But, you know, there's trying to figure out how to master your field work, I think, is one of those, chapters, from being a student to the field work chapter, and then the transitioning to the, you know, clinical practice. So let's kind of just, you know, did you have any fieldwork experiences, or what was your fieldwork experiences like as a student?
You know, every semester it was different.
Yeah, of course.
Contrary to what a lot of people felt going into fieldwork, I think I underestimated how difficult it would be and how challenging it might be, mentally, emotionally, physically. And so I thought, oh, you know, I'll have people, supervisors who will support me. I'll have people to ask questions, and it'll just be, you know, observations. So I'll go in and, you know, clock in and clock out, and everything will be good.
That sounds so easy.
It sounds so easy. And I was like, I'm really excited to get out of the classroom setting, away from textbooks, and have downtime.
Isn't that's hilarious? But actually, I know I think I remember thinking the same thing. You're like, oh, I'm going to have actually some time to do some things, and maybe not always the case, but
no, and it's funny because I think for my first fieldwork, I actually brought my textbook to study for an exam.
You're thinking,
and I thought, I mean, I really thought I would have a lot of time to just kind of do my own thing, and so. Field work for me, I went in thinking that it wouldn't be very difficult, and ended up being surprised and found out that I really had to show initiative, that I had to do a lot of studying and learning on my own, and that it was going to be a lifelong process. And so what I learned from fieldwork, because transitioning from the classroom and clinical setting really gives you a firsthand look at what it's like to try to meet your productivity goals, what it's like to stand next to a patient who may be going through a really hard time. And what do you say? What do you not say? These are things that you don't really anticipate or have to think about when you're in the classroom, or watching my clinical instructor going through even, office politics, and what does that look like? How do you navigate through conflict that may arise, and what's the best way to de-escalate from something like that? So getting a real life experience into what it might be like when I become an entry-level practitioner was really insightful and helpful for me, but challenging.
Yeah, really challenging. Like what did you do for your level 2s? What type of settings did you do?
So I chose mental health. Mental health is what I've always wanted to pursue. Back in 2000, when I was at Berkeley, I majored in psychology, and I had always intended on going into clinical psychology, and I wanted to be a psychologist. So, but I ended up not pursuing it because as I was doing observations and volunteer work, I realized that it was really hard to detach myself and leave work at home. And I found myself really struggling emotionally and mentally as I was working in the field. And so I left that for several years, and I continued to work in healthcare, but I knew that I always wanted to come back to mental health. So then when I went into occupational therapy right away, I was like, I really want to do mental health. I want to get experience in mental health setting. And so that's what I did. I was in supportive housing, and I really concentrated on working with members who had issues with hoarding. And that was my first look into what it would be like what it would be like to be in the community setting as a OT practitioner, working in supportive housing with people who have serious mental illness. So as you can imagine, although occupational therapy was sort of birthed out of this in mental health, I didn't feel like I was really prepared to see and experience what I experienced in mental health. Yeah. There were issues. I would go visit members' home, and there would be cockroaches everywhere. There were bed bug issues. And I was like, do I really have to do this? I kept trying to find a job description. I'm like, this can't be a part of my job descriptions. I can't do this. But in the end, I had to own this because I realized that how can I assess the barriers that are impacting her life? How can I even begin to identify the things that are preventing her from doing what she wants to do if I can't do a full evaluation of her living environment?
I know.
So I got suited up. I learned everything I needed to know about bed bugs. I went in there and, I put my OT cap on, and that's when I realized I was like, wow, my experience is going to be as wide and varied as the diagnosis out there.
Yeah, really. Yeah, really.
But I mean, every step of the process, it was such a great learning experience.
Oh, absolutely. So that kind of brings us, like you touched on. So tip 1, we're going through, like you said, the 7 tips I wish I had known. And like you had said, tip 1, get prepared mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So what are some strategies you'd recommend to best prepare for fieldwork prior to starting?
Yeah, so I think just accepting mentally that it's going to be a challenging experience and that it will push you out of your comfort zone, and to accept that as what your life is going to be for several months, but really embracing it, not being afraid of how challenging it would be or whether or not you'll get through it, but to understand that it is in this it's in this discomfort that you will really have your greatest breakthrough. And I really do believe this is that, when we're comfortable and we're in our routine and doing things the same way in and out, sometimes we don't have to think about how we're going to problem solve. It doesn't challenge us to really think outside the box. But I think when you're pushed out of your comfort zone, you begin to get more creative. You have to tap into your resourcefulness and you have to become adaptable. And so understanding that it will be a challenging experience, but one that will really help you grow, I think mentally will prepare you and give you the readiness to go in there with confidence and with excitement that, hey, this is going to be challenging, but a really good experience for me and one that will carry with me for the rest of my life. I think mentally that's a really good way to start. And just by writing a list of things that you can do, I mean, you don't have to make such a big commitment like I'm going to work out every day for 2 hours a day, or, make these extreme commitments when you're already going through a transition. But to say, like, even if for 10 minutes you're going to meditate or work out or sing or dance or whatever it is that helps you decompress, I think making yourself and your self-care a priority is of paramount importance and one that many of us neglect. And I am the biggest, I always neglect.
I'm awful too. It is definitely easier said than done,
Yes. And how often do we feel like we need to pour and give to others? And it's in us as, caregivers. We want to give and we want to provide care. And we always talk about how important it is to do self-care. Meanwhile, we're like withering away in the corner on the brink of having a mental breakdown. And then we wake up.
Are you talking about me or are you talking about in general? I'm just kidding.
Right? I mean, I think all of us.
I know. All of us. Yeah.
So, although work-life balance will be initially challenging and we have to allow ourselves time to acclimate, but I think that doesn't mean that you don't set goals for 10 to 15 minutes a day just to have with your own self, to pamper yourself, to give yourself what you need. I think will help everyone really get through this time and thrive through it. So those would probably be the main things that I wish I would have done, instead of coming home and feeling like I need to read the textbook right away and then falling asleep with a book on my face. Maybe I should have stretched for 5 minutes. Maybe I could have taken a walk and talked to a friend and vent about it a little bit, and I wish I would have taken more opportunities to do that.
Yeah. Here. I concur. I remember my fieldwork experience, which has obviously been a while now, but I remember just the stress. I remember feeling the exact same way, feeling like, okay, I'm going to be in the clinic, it's going to be a little bit easier in some ways. I remember kind of thinking like, okay, I got this. Like, I feel like I have a good foundation. I know what I'm doing. And then that feeling of having still no time and still not giving myself that self-care and still feeling stressed.
Yes.
But for me, for a lot of us in different cities where you're alone anyway. And it's like trying to like really, take care of yourself while you're going through that. It's a whole new chapter. So it's really hard.
Yes.
So step 1, get prepared mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Tip 2, set realistic expectations. So, what can you or should you expect? What do you think?
So we just talked about this actually in terms of like expecting that it will be challenging, that it will be different, that it will throw out of your comfort zone. But beyond that, I think expecting to not know everything. Expect that you will and may make mistakes. Expect that there might not be as much support as you would like, or that you may not be able to ask as many questions as you'd like. Expect that things will not go your way, and how will you still problem solve? And I think for me, I had a need to really control my environment, control the outcomes that I would have at the end of the day. And I needed things to be really neat and compartmentalized. And things change all the time. There are shifting priorities. There are changes to the schedule. Your CI might actually have a life and get sick one day and not show up. And then what do you do? Things are always in flux, and there is, and that's what makes it so dynamic. But I think for me, needing to have a control, such as control over my environment, made it really difficult for me to be flexible and adaptable. And had I been a little bit more, had I had an open mind about what it might be in terms of, the changes that would all take place, I might have been able to manage and cope with the changing environment better. So, just expecting that it won't always go your way. And I know that sounds really simple, but I think inherent in people and human beings in general is a desire to have a degree of control, and a degree of perfectionism also, I think, lives within many of us, and trying to let go of that and surrender that so that you can go in with really fresh perspective, open mind to say, I'm here really as a guest. I'm not here to run the show, but to learn and observe. How can I fit into this environment? How can I come in and streamline into this process that already exists? I think is really an important perspective to maintain.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, like, I feel like OT as a profession, we like to kind of think that we're, open-minded and kind of going with the flow a bit. But, you've almost feel like in a way school is so intense that it kind of forces you to be much more rigid than you have to be disciplined. You have to get through it, and you're working hard, and you have to study, and you have to stay home during, I don't know, if you want to go out on a Thursday night, but you were like, hey, I have to test. And, you're so, maybe I should say, I say you as in like the OT students, but maybe it was just me. I was very rigid, a bit with, I wanted to succeed. And then you get to your field works and you have those, what are actually the realistic expectations, which transitions us into step 3 about being flexible. Tip 3, flexible, open-minded, and curious.
Yeah.
So what do you think has helped you be successful? Or what do you think would allow, future students to be successful?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that are really important is keeping a curious mind. And that sounds like just an adjective, like you either have it or you don't. But I think it's an active process. Like, to be curious is to say, I am going to be curious, and to be mindful about how you stop to notice and observe and obtain the information from your environment. And so for me, that would translate to going into fieldwork setting and not just passively sitting there and looking at what's going on, but to really have that, why is she positioning the patient that way? What part of the OT process is she in? What theoretical framework is she using? And just being curious about everything. And of course, you don't want to bombard them every time. And these are questions that internal dialogue that you would have, but
right.
Curious in general about things, about events, about people, about things, about the process is, I think, going to be really helpful in helping you observe and notice things that that you might not have noticed otherwise. So keeping that curiosity alive. And I said open-minded because, you'll really come across many people of different background and socioeconomic background, different education levels, culture, religion. And, we all come with our own, assumptions and understanding of the world, and that's fine. But to open yourself up to be able to understand, because we want to provide client-centered care. We want to understand what is important to that person. And so being open-minded and approaching every person respectful of where they come from and being able to meet them at their level, I think is really important as you're getting introduced to different patients and clients and families. And of course, we talked about being flexible and adaptable because that will help you manage stressful situations. And not only just to cope, but I think it really gives you all the skills that you need to respond and to adjust in an effective way to all the different environments and challenges that you'll come across, whether through field work or during your NBCOT process. And even as a new entry-level practitioner, I think this is something that all of us can continue to improve on, adaptability and flexibility. So,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, talk about a little bit about open-mindedness and the differences in people that you encounter. I think it's actually really important, and it's really a great time to self-reflect on what your own biases are, like acknowledging them and or realizing that you even have any. So sometimes you just feel like, I'm open-minded. I'm going to go into this, and you feel like, I can think of a few examples, but you go in, you think, yeah, of course I'm open-minded. And then there's a situation where your gut or whatever is telling you something completely different. And you're like, oh my gosh, how do I overcome that feeling? Because we all have whatever, experiences that you have. And then it's like, how do you overcome that and maintain professionalism, maintain client-centered care? Like you said, meet the patient where they are, what they need, and providing that service despite your own biases, I guess. Sometimes it's also something that you end up learning along the way. You learn about yourself, and you learn about, the different types of people that you are working with. But that, I think, was one of the most interesting things for me, honestly, coming from I grew up in North Dakota, very, small town, just in moving to different areas and, experiencing completely different, like you said, socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds and things like that. And just trying to be aware of my own, even just like me as a person, and how can I still best treat or overcome some of those things? Like, is this what I should be thinking? Or it's crazy, but we all have something, and trying to figure out how we can be the most open-minded.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. It's crazy stuff, but it's such a time of growth. One of my level 2 experiences, and maybe I've talked about it on the podcast before, was at Wisconsin State Mental Hospital, which I probably changed the name to something a much more appropriate, mental health facility or something. But it was at the time, and it was I originally got into OT for I started out in social work, and then transitioned because I liked mental health as well. And so I worked in a forensic behavioral unit. And so they had criminal backgrounds. This is one of my, like I can think about specifically for me is like you working with people who were supposed to go to jail but have a mental illness, and then they're quote sentenced to the mental health facility. And so you have people with backgrounds like pedophiles and people who have murder. And so like okay. And I remember going in being like, oh my gosh, like how do I overcome some of my own feelings towards those, these patients, and really looking at them as people and trying to overcome some of my own barriers, I think was such a learning experience. And it was actually one of my favorite. It was it was amazing. I learned so much about myself and the world and everything. So, so just, I think those are the types of things that we actually don't really realize that we're learning, in addition to just being a good practitioner and experiencing, learning from others and being curious. So it's great. Fieldwork is such an amazing / stressful / exciting
It really
time.
is. And that was really insightful what you shared. You're absolutely right. Like, you don't realize how open-minded or not open-minded you might be until you're put in that situation.
Yeah.
So great insight there.
Yeah, I think, that's just one example of, I'm sure there's many, many examples people can throw out there, but it's just like, sometimes you don't even know what you are biased against until you're exposed to it. I think sometimes you're like, yes, I can deal with that. That's no problem. And then you get there and you're like, oh, I actually am having a much harder time with this than I actually thought I was going to. So it's great. It's a time of growth as well.
Yes.
So let's go on to tip number 4. Asking good questions. So what do you think, what kind of questions would you ask your fieldwork educator before you start? Like, you got your facility, you have your, your fieldwork educator name. Is there anything that you feel like you would be some good essential questions to ask them before you even get started?
So I think one of the ways that you could really prepare for field work is to understand your practice setting, to know your practice setting, and to really understand your population. And so one of the questions would be, how many clients and what kind of clients you typically treat, and what are some of the conditions you treat most here in this setting. And I think this is important because here, just understanding the practice setting and your population will help you think about the frame of reference or theories that would be used in that practice setting, and how these theories would guide intervention planning or our treatment strategies. And based on that, we can then gather all the resources, pull out all those handouts and textbooks from school, that's relevant to that clinical practice setting. And you could even begin to write cheat sheets to help you remember all of the information that's specific to the site. So, whether you're in pediatric setting and you need to learn more about sensory integration, or you're going to be in acute care and you really need to brush up on your knowledge about, weight bearing and transfer techniques, whatever it might be, understanding your practice setting and beginning to think about, providing evidence-based care and utilizing the frame of reference that you learned will help you to think critically and to really improve your clinical rationale when you're observing and learning in the setting. Another thing that I think is important to know is, the kind of assessments that the setting might use frequently. So ask them, what are the most commonly used assessments? And ask yourself, like, have I even heard of these assessments? Am I familiar with them? Would I know what to do with it?
Right.
And if you don't, it might be worth going back to the classroom and talking to your professor to say, can we review? Is it possible for me to take out the Bailey and take a look at all the things that are in it? And finally, just defer back to your clinical instructor to say, like, what would you recommend? How do you think I should prepare to best position myself for success here? Because ultimately, every setting, even if you're in acute care or mental health, even within the same practice setting, the process will vary greatly depending on who's in staff and their process and protocol. And so understanding what it is that you'll need to study, what you'll need to prioritize, I think will be really helpful, so that although you will all continue to be surprised, you can reduce the number of surprises and you can begin to have some expectations of what it is expected of you.
Yeah, Definitely. Being prepared, feeling prepared, even if you don't really feel prepared, you feel like you're kind of prepared. And
Yeah.
going in with being prepared is much, much easier than floundering through, which we have all done it. Like, we've all done it. Well, how about tip number 5? This is Miri's tip number 5 of mastering your fieldwork. So it is build your interpersonal and professional skills.
Just quickly before we do that, though, I wanted to go back to asking questions, just real quick. That another thing is, people, when we're asking questions, so these are sort of the questions that you would ask your fieldwork instructor before you begin. But I want to really encourage students to ask questions throughout their fieldwork and to make a list of all the questions that they have. And of course, we don't want to bombard. I mean, I've seen other students sort of asking a question throughout the day, every time they had a question, and they would sort of blurt it out every time they didn't know. Or they're, depending on the style, some people would have all these questions and bombard them at the end of the day when the instructor is trying to get home. And so I think it's important to come up with a schedule, a set time to go through all of the questions that you may have, a time that is agreeable to your CI instructor, and for yourself, a good time to get that support and the resources. But beyond that, questions that really will help you to become better as a clinical practitioner. So one of the things that I wish I would have done is, instead of seeking the correct answer, which we're so often used to doing in the classroom and getting that correct answer on the exam, I think it's really important to start thinking critically and going through the process, going through the OT process. And maybe this is just really salient in my mind right now because I talk a lot about the MBC OT for my OT Miri YouTube channel, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is to begin to think about building and improving upon your clinical reasoning skills when you're a student, and utilizing your fieldwork experience and maximizing that so you really begin to understand what that looks like. Instead of saying, what's the correct answer? Instead of memorizing definition and diagnosis and definition, all of these things that we feel like we need to learn, which you do, I think it's more important to ask yourself, like, why is this happening? What are the priorities? What is the most important thing? What is a treatment approach that is safe and ethical, client-centered, and evidence-based? And is there just one approach to this, or are there multiple approaches? And if there are multiple approaches, what would be the best approach at this time, given the acuity of the condition, given their background, their barriers, their strengths? What would be that best treatment? And I think this is so important because when you start to preparing for the MBCOT or even become an entry-level practitioner, you'll find that there's no cookie cutter way. No one's going to come to you and say, here, this is the one way you're going to do it, and it's the correct way. And even if you begin to treat a certain way, it might not go your way. You have to be quick on your feet. And so beginning to think about these scenarios clinically and using critical thinking and coming up and formulating these strong clinical rationale with your clinical instructor, I think is really important. And on that same note, to say that don't just ask simple questions, like ask really good questions, right? So, I think there's a tendency, and I know I'm in the habit of doing it too. Like, we just sort of blur out the questions. We want quick, easy answers. But the kind of questions, the best answers will always be answers that you get after you've done research and after you've done due diligence. So initiate that process and become resourceful, become a researcher. I mean, not literally a researcher, but research and do your homework, because this is what's going to really help you to build the critical thinking skills that is necessary, instead of just going straight to the answer. Or straight to social media or straight to the internet. Because in that thoughtfulness and in that contemplation and mindfulness where you're really going to war with this question and you start to dissect it and think, that's what's really going to help you pass the board and to think critically and clinically when you're on the job. So I can't highlight the importance of formulating good questions and having thoughtful dialogues and using your experience at fieldwork for those dialogues with, your clinical instructor.
Oh my gosh. I wish I could just quote that and hang it on a wall, because the truth of it is, also as somebody who I run seniorsflourish.com, obviously. And, I get all sorts of questions as well. And I think that is one of the trickiest. It's that transition between, being in the classroom to field work, or even transitioning to being a new practitioner. It's like those critical thinking skills need to be strengthened. Yes. Be strength, because we're evolving and we're trying to learn all the time. Because sometimes, like you said, it's not, the answer is also not so black and white. And you have to, there's the environmental context, and is there a caregiver? Is there, what are the underlying, do they have dual diagnoses? Like, there's so many things that go into it. It's not, like you said, in general, very black and white. And so trying to give, quote, advice sometimes, or give a direction, my answer ends up being a lot more questions, because it's hard. I'm like, I don't really know how to answer that, because I actually don't know what you're looking at from a holistic perspective. And so I think sometimes, like you said, if you have good questions, then you get a really good understanding of what the heck is going on. Because honestly, your clinical instructor, your field educator, a lot of times we've been doing it for years, and those things come as second nature to us. We know exactly the safety things. We are looking at it. We've had the experience, so we can look at them from a different,
perspective.
And so sometimes, we may be doing X, Y, and Z with one patient that we hadn't done it with the last patient, that may look like shouldn't you be doing it the same way? But we've, refine those critical thinking skills to say, like, I'm doing it this way because. And so that's why it's really important to ask those questions, because, like you're in school and you have to justify everything. You write these plans of care, which you will, quote, never do in the clinic. They're ridiculously long. Or you're doing this huge activity analysis that we're writing out every step, and people feel like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? I'm never going to, quote, do this in the clinic.
Right.
But they are forcing you. I shouldn't say forcing. They are building upon your critical thinking skills, because you actually don't really realize that is like the key. It's one of the biggest keys. You really need to get that under your. But it does take experience. But if you can ask those questions, yeah. So anyway, I don't mean to be like keep going over it, but that is exactly right.
Yes.
It's easier said than done.
And it's really important. I mean, I appreciate the emphasis, because this is something that I myself don't feel like I can say enough. I think it's so important to ask good questions, but spend time to come up then with good questions. So,
yeah. And it's tricky sometimes, because honestly, I remember feeling like I don't even know what I don't know. Like, I'm like, oh, should I be asking something about that? Like, I don't even know if I don't know, or like, it's like turned into this crazy thing. But yes, ask good questions. Can't emphasize it enough. Awesome. I'm glad we went back to that tip.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay. Are we ready for tip 5? Are you ready for tip 5? Did I miss it? Okay. Tip 5. Here we go. Build your interpersonal and professional skills. So what are some essential professional characteristics that will, facilitate success in fieldwork?
So, well, beyond obvious things like, being punctual and professional and ethical, I think, communication is one of the underrated, but one of the most important well, this is not really a characteristic, the skill that will facilitate success. And communication, I think there's, different components of it. First, you just have to listen, and not listen so that you know how to respond, but listen actively by trying to understand what that person is trying to convey. And I see this all the time when two people are talking, and then the other person, you can tell, like, they're just trying to formulate a response. They're like, how am I going to come back and say what it is that I need to say? But an effective communication really occurs when you are able to understand what they're trying to convey, and therefore the objective of the conversation. So listening actively and communicating clearly, and making sure that you can then use that communication to problem solve quickly. And I think being able to communicate effectively is so essential, because this is what's going to help you build rapport and trust and, respectful, collaborative working relationships, which will help you become a really good team player. And so working on a communication and making sure that if there are any concerns or conflicts that may arise, that you address them, without being defensive or passive aggressive, but using really good, communication skills to express what it is, what your needs are and what your desires are, and to problem solve together. And I only say this because I had this experience, and I'm a little embarrassed to share it, but I had a clinical instructor who was always late. And this was it was probably the most challenging part of my fieldwork experience, because I had to drive and commute and I live in Los Angeles, so at least an hour, I feel like, to get to fieldwork setting. And every day I had to wake up really early just to get there on time. And I like to get there 5 to 10 minutes early. And she was late by at least 30 minutes every day. And I think this went on for quite some time. And in a state of frustration and delirium and not really being professional, I needed to vent. And so I sent a text to my friend, and I was, crying in my car waiting. I was just really tired. And I said, my CI is never on time. She is never, ever on time. I feel so miserable. She is unprofessional. And I just started going off about how frustrated I was. And then I pressed send, and my heart dropped.
Did you send it to her? No!
And maybe one day she'll listen to this podcast and she'll live this experience very vividly, and with a heartache that both of us had. But I remember thinking, like, I just want to die. I was so dramatic. I was like, in this moment, I just want to crawl up into a ball and I just want to die, because I will never be able to recover from this situation. It wasn't even about like failing field work. I think it was more about the shame and the embarrassment and having to deal with the situation afterwards. And in the end, what I learned was that I wasn't sorry that actually it got sent to her, because to say that, well, I'm sorry, it was meant for somebody else, that's really even worse, right? But the fact that it got sent to her really forced us to talk about the issue at hand. And the right thing to do for me would have been to go up to her. And I'm afraid of confrontation. So I didn't want to address it with her. So instead I was just, keeping this inside. I wasn't talking to her. I didn't seek support from her.
And venting,
It was just brewing. And so I remember talking to her about it, and she was so generous and graceful about it. And she started telling me about, the responsibilities that she had at home and that prevented her from coming here on time, that, she also admitted to some of the mistakes that she had made and things that she could have done better and things that I certainly could have done better. And maybe she assumed that after some time I just would come 30 minutes late too. I don't know. There were a lot of assumptions that were made. And the point is, I should have just talked to her, and I shouldn't have been so afraid to talk to her about my concerns, but I was. And so the final communication, the only time that I decided to communicate was through this text that got wrongly sent to her.
Right.
So, this stands out even till this day as one of the things that I am not proud of, but was one of the greatest learning experiences, because now I realize, like, hey, if you're uncomfortable with something and if you have something to say, make eye contact, look at that person. You don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to explode. Don't even let it get there, but address your concerns like an adult. And
oh my gosh, oh gosh. That would be, I'm probably very similar to you. Like, it's one of those things like, yes, I know what you should have done. That's why I was like, no, you didn't send it to her, because I feel the same way. Like, if you're going to address it, I would address it. But like the whole, like, I'm just venting to my friend. And then you're like, oh no. Oh God. But yeah, communication doesn't matter how awkward it is, it has to be done. It has to be done because otherwise you are not happy. Like you are miserable and then like you can't actually be your best. Like you have to just let those things out, good, bad, or otherwise. Cause I mean, even clinical instructors have all been through it, right? Or, you know, everyone has their own thing. So it's like you have to be able to be open. If you want your clinical instructor to be open and honest and give good feedback or, you know, give their best, you have to do the same.
Agreed.
You know, it's just, just talking about it, like actually, oh my gosh, I can just feel the stress of, yeah.
Anyway. It was bad. It was really bad. And it will really forever stand as an example to not do that ever again. I'm glad I learned early. I mean, fieldwork experience for me is brimming with learning lessons. I learned the hard way on many different things.
Yeah. Oh, you are not alone. You are not alone. I almost got a little anxious talking about that. Okay. Anyway, so next tip number 6, define and set your priorities for future success. So what are some main priorities that you think actually students should consider during field work? Not only to be successful through field work, but maybe just like when they're transitioning to their own OT career.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the most important points and one that I really enjoy talking about. But I think we just all have to learn and live and sort of breathe occupational therapy. And I say this because, you know, going into field work and going into the OT field in general, I sort of thought and expected and assumed that a lot of people in the mainstream in the healthcare know more about occupational therapy than they do. I mean, at least the physicians or healthcare providers, right? But I was wrong. I remember walking into the fieldwork setting and saying, "Hi, I'm Miri. I'm an occupational therapy student." And I would be met with, "Welcome. So what do? You guys do like vocational work, right?" And this completely threw me off guard. And I was like, well, yes and no, occupation. And it's not that USD didn't prepare me to adequately represent OT and teach me what occupational therapy is. I just wasn't ready to articulate concisely the distinct value of OT that's specific to my setting. So, you know, I ended up going home. I actually stood in front of the mirror, and this sounds really dorky, but I sort of practiced my 60-second elevator pitch that's, you know, described my role as an OT fieldwork student, and what that meant in terms of what we provide to the clients, the value that I would bring. And I've said it so many times, I think I have it memorized. But, you know, I think understanding your value as an occupational therapist or occupational therapy student and being an ambassador and advocate to be able to articulate that, I think is really important, not for just the clients, but families, schools, hospital, hand clicks. I mean, how many different settings do OT practitioners work in? And how can we as a profession expect our government to understand the important value that we bring if we ourselves cannot articulate our role and the tangible and the measurable impact that we have and that we can bring? And how can we expect our doctors to make referrals for OT if our friends and neighbors have never heard of OT and therefore don't seek out OT services? So I think in the end, we all have to take ownership of our OT identity and understand what it is. I mean, reflect on it. Like, what drew you to OT? Like, why do you like OT? And what is the value that you will bring in that setting? And be able to articulate that in your fieldwork setting, because you're going to be doing it for the rest of your life. And hopefully not the rest of your life. Hopefully, you know, within next 5-10 years, more people will know distinctively how OT can be a benefit to them. But I still think, you know, we have ways to go. And until then, I think we have to take responsibility for representing and advocating for our profession.
Oh my gosh. I know. It's one of those things, like, I think we just naturally know exactly what we do. And so when, you know, you even look at the definition through, you know, AOTA, or if you look at like a quote definition of what OT is, we're like, yes, of course we do that. Yes, we provide, you know, occupation and, you know, help independence, but like just to the layperson, like, what does that look like? And I think that's why it's important to actually be able to identify and have your elevator pitch for your specific setting, because it can look very different in different settings, even though our core value and our distinct value is the same. Like we're promoting independence and we're helping people live successful, independent lives. And that could be mental health or working in, a pediatric clinic. But like to the outside world, they're like, how does OT work in a mental health facility and work with kids at a school? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And us, we're like, yes, of course, that's what we do. That's exact, because we know the theory and we know the whole thing. And so it's sometimes a bit harder to articulate. But if you know exactly what your role is in the setting, it's much easier to promote that. And
absolutely,
it kind of leads us to being passionate. Like, be a passionate OT practitioner, which can be hard sometimes. There's a lot that goes into it. We were talking about this earlier. Being passionate about our profession it's important to reach out and connect with others and making sure that we're providing the best care we can. But you have to make that effort sometimes. And
absolutely. And there's one more thing also, and this is a question that I get quite often, so I just wanted to add it in there. So while you're doing your field work, is it recommended that you start studying for the MBCOT? Should you even consider that when you're a fieldwork student? And I just wanted to address this real quickly because I think it's a priority. It's a goal and a priority and a requirement to practice as an entry-level practitioner. So a lot of students begin to think about it. And, my response to that question when I get it is, everyone is different. Everyone has a different learning style and needs. So no one really can tell you how and when you should begin preparing for your exam. But having said that, Mandy, if I could do one thing differently, I would have bought my study review books ahead of time. And that doesn't mean that I would have started really hardcore studying and preparing for the MBCOT during fieldwork. But had I taken a look at those practice questions, had I looked at the domains that are covered, and had I looked at the first 2 pages, the index or there's a sort of like an outline of what the study guides cover, I would at least have an idea of all the important concepts that these study guides encourage you to review and study. And based on that, I think I would have approached my fieldwork a lot differently. So anyone who's gone through the practice questions know that it's not a lot of factual questions. You hardly get a question that's like, what is blank? Give me the definition. But it's not that easy.
Right.
But meanwhile, I'm trying to get those memorization. I'm trying to learn all of these definitions, and I spend a lot of time doing that. Whereas, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, building clinical rationale. But to help you build your clinical rationale and to ask good questions, look no further than those study guides. They're good questions, and they're hard questions. They're questions that's probably going to have your clinical instructor scratching their heads to be like, that's a really good question.
Totally.
And you're like, I know, right? I think it applies in this clinical scenario. Let's crack it together. And I think I would have done a lot more of that. And I didn't start preparing for the MBCOT at all until the time when I realized I needed to take it. But I think you really can utilize that fieldwork experience. You can utilize the resources that you have with your professor, with your clinical instructor, and just being exposed to the environment to begin to think about the OT process, which is so important to know. Where are you in the OT process? What are the strategies that you would use in different settings? Because you have to work in different settings, whether mental health or pediatrics or acute care, whatever it might be, to put on that OT thinking cap and to begin to think about how you're going to tackle the exam, I think would be helpful. And maybe it wouldn't be for everybody, but I think it would have made a tremendous difference for me. And I say that in hindsight, so one will never know. But I do want to encourage the people who are listening to this try that and see if it would change the way you observe and interact and engage in your fieldwork experience. And you just might be surprised. So
serious. That's so seriously true. Well, and like you say, like, I think sometimes even like, going through those, just like your example was like talking to your clinical instructor about some of those things, and the clinical instructor be like, like I was saying earlier, sometimes as a clinical instructor, you do so many things automatically. You go through those clinical, critical thinking skills, and you go through, you're combining all this theory, but when you learn it initially so it's so linear. You're learning this theory, you're learning this, and then you're trying to learn how to put them together and problem solve and critical think. And when you get into the clinic, eventually that just becomes second nature. And so actually as a clinical instructor, it's really kind of fun, because it challenges you too. You're like, why am I doing this? Even though you kind of know it, but like to be able to articulate it and help the student helps you and kind of makes, I don't know, it revitalizes you as a clinician a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's a great experience and it's a great time. Yeah. Like you said, looking back, hindsight is 2020, but all those little tips I think are super helpful.
Yeah. I only wish I would have known ahead of time. It would have saved me a lot.
I know. Oh, those are the things. So did we go through all the tips, or did I miss one?
I think so. Yeah.
I think the last one we kind of covered, like tip number 7 was about being passionate and knowing your distinct value as an OT practitioner. So, we covered a lot of strategies and tips to help students and master their field work. But if you had to state one thing that you think is the most important to kind of take away, what would that be?
Yeah. Enjoy the moment. Enjoy the moment, be present, and be grateful. And I think this just goes beyond field work. And it's something that, Mandy, I've really been thinking about this a lot in light of just so many natural disasters that have been happening coast to coast. It's really heartbreaking, and around the world. And I wonder sometimes, like, has it always been this way, or is social media sort of allowing me to see all of the things that happen? But our life can change so quickly. I was in the Bay Area last week with my friend who just gave birth to a baby daughter. And as you may have heard, the entire Napa, Sonoma, the Bay Area was there was just massive fire. And that's where I spent most of my adult life, in the Bay Area. So it really hit close to home for me. And I thought there are a lot of things and goals and priorities in my life. But at the end of the day, if I'm not relishing each moment, if I'm not seizing every opportunity, and if I'm not giving 100% to what has been given to me because I'm so worried about my future and what I want to accomplish in the future, then I'm not really living. And if I am too busy making a living that I'm not living my life, then my life will have been lived in vain. And that thought really makes me sad. And I forget, I may be saying this right now to you, but maybe in an hour I will forget again. And I'm anxious and stressed about something that really is so small in light of the greatness of this present moment, the fact that I'm alive, the fact that I could feel the sun on my face, the fact that I could feel the wind and the air that I breathe is of good quality. There are a million things to be thankful for. And I want to keep my focus on that. And I want to be true and committed to even the small things that have been endowed upon me, the small things that have been given to me as an opportunity. I want to give it my 110% instead of going after so many different things. And I think all of that comes down to being mindful and being grateful and present in that moment. And I say the word carpe diem, seize the day. That's sort of my motto. I have a lot of different mottos, but one of my mottos is carpe diem. And whether that's field work and you're really stressed going through it, always remember the big picture. Come back to what moves you, what motivates you, what moves your heart into gratitude, and simmer on that and relish on that and savor the beauties of life, because there's only one of you. There's only one life. and we don't want life to pass off.
Beautifully said, Miri.
So,
Well, let's, that's, actually can't, I don't even have, like I've said before, I like to always make lots of comments because I get really excited, and I'm just going to savor that, last little thing you said. But so I just wanted to kind of just review real quick, 7 tips from Miri of the, mastering field work. So tip 1 was get prepared mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Tip 2, set realistic expectations. 3, be flexible, open-minded, and curious. Tip 4, ask good questions. Ask good questions. Tip 5, build your interpersonal and professional skills. Tip 6, define and set your priorities for future success. And 7, be passionate and know the distinct value you bring as an OT practitioner. So I think those are wonderful. And I think they apply in so many different, not just for field work, but I think those are some really good core tips and ideas for especially people who are entering into specifically level 2s. And it's such a transitional time of your professional career. Like you feel you're getting so close to being done, but you have so many other things to do. You have to finish your field works. You have to take your NBCOT, and then finding a job. And just that there's so much going on in life, but if we can kind of focus a little bit on the important things and just savor in those moments, because you'll never go back to fieldwork. And it's such a defining in time and such a time of learning. It's an amazing time. And so, and then, Miri provided all of the listeners a super helpful PDF, like a quick reference of all the tips. If you guys want to print that off and keep it, go over it. It's just a good way to kind of reflect and kind of go over some of those things. And then, make sure that you follow her, check her out on YouTube or Facebook group. She's everywhere. Instagram. She has her website, otmiri.com. But thank you, Miri, so much.
It was
for
wonderful,
being here
and
today.
I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
And thanks, everyone, for listening. So until next time.
If you are an occupational therapy practitioner that enjoyed today's podcast, I invite you to check out the Learning Lab at seniorsflourish.com/Learning Lab. The Learning Lab is the essential resource for OT practitioners working with older adults looking for more treatment ideas, support, and resources to be the best they can be. So whether you're struggling to find evidence-based treatment ideas, you don't have time to research for resources or patient diagnoses, or are even looking for ways to earn more professional development units, then the Learning Lab can help you become a more effective and efficient practitioner. With weekly educational videos, a huge resource and handout list, a bi-monthly journal club where you can earn professional development units, a supportive community forum, and even some exclusive member-only bonuses, the Learning Lab is the perfect place to help you be the best OT practitioner you can be. It's like having your own OT help desk. So check it out at seniorsflourish.com/Learning Lab. Thanks for listening. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Jaros Collective, a podcast network that's redefining old and equipping healthcare clinicians to better serve our aging population. Find out more at GEROScollective.com.